Good afternoon. Thank you very much for staying with us for the end of day one at World Travel Market. I hope you've all had a very productive day. And those of you who've chosen to be here, very sensibly, I would suggest, because we're about to have a very entertaining session for the last one of day one of World Travel Market. We're not going to have any presentations, quite radically, because we want to have a good chat. We want to have a good chat about what's happened in the last 40 years of travel, a quick romp through the marketing of those years, those decades, and a few anecdotal stories. And then we want to get questions from you. We've had Slido in operation today, which is up on the top left of the screen. If you go onto your phone, look up slido.com. You don't have to download anything. You don't have to take the app. Just go onto slido.com and put in hashtag WTM14 on the global stage, 19. You will then be able to post your questions immediately, whatever question you may have, or in response to what the panel says to you this afternoon. So please join in the conversation. I'd love it to be not just the five of us up here, but the rest of you in the audience as well. But we do need people to start the conversation. So I would like to introduce my panel for this afternoon. What have we learned in 40 years? What about the next 40? We're doing this because World Travel Market is 40 years old this year as well. One of my panelists, Tim from STA Travel, his company is also 40 years old as well. So happy birthdays all around. Thank you very much. Tim, STA Travel, 40 years old today. Happy birthday. Now, I've left all my notes behind as to who they are, so I'm going to have to remember. So Tim, starting on the far right, started his career at STA Travel in Ealing in West London. It was your first appointment at STA Travel. He moved on. He ran several London branches. He ended up running the flagship store. He moved up into management. He's now ended up as the country manager for France and for Britain or England?
UK.
For Britain. The UK. Tim, on my far left. Inside we have Alistair Mackenzie, who I've known for about 40 years as well. We were print journalists together back in the day when newspapers mattered.
You even wrote for me once.
I did actually work for him once. Alistair rose to exalted heights to become launch travel editor at Classic FM, when radio stations had travel editors. It's extraordinary. Congratulations, how you swung that one. He's moved into, like me, became a digital evangelist about 15 years ago. He's now a blogger. He's a contributor to conferences such as this. And he has his own blog called Mech Traveller, a very niche site about things mechanical. Talk about tanks to Alistair and he'll bore you for hours. Thank you, Alistair. Chloe Gunning in the centre, Wanderlust Chloe. I saw Chloe talk impressively at a conference in Italy in June, Traverse. We were on a panel at the end of the day, held her own, more than held her own, contributed hugely. I've since learned that Chloe is one of the best bloggers in the UK.
Thank you.
I was moderator.
And she was born into digital, I think it's fair to say. You were, before that, a radio producer, weren't you?
Yeah, I was a radio producer at Heart FM for 5 years.
Oh,
so
Heart FM. So
done my time there as well.
She's the cool person on the panel. But also interestingly, like Alistair, Chloe and myself, former media who moved into the digital sphere. And there's Peter, who I think preferred to stay in the print and radio sphere, not necessarily the digital age that's come along. However, Peter was the launch editor of Wish You Were Here on ITV in 1973. Who remembers Wish You Were Here on the telly?
Yeah.
Yay, look, 15 fans in the audience. Hurrah, thank you very much. He stayed with the programme for 20 years. He has subsequently become a travel writer of repute. He's been Travel Writer of the Year 5 times and won a Lifetime Achievement for travel writing in 2009, more or less. That's my panel today. Please give them a big hand. So, Tim, introduce yourselves, please. 1 or 2 lines about yourselves. I've given you a bit of a broad
But you've just done it.
structure. But tell me about the transition of retail in the last 20 years.
So 20 years I've been doing it in retail as a traveller. That's how I started. You know, I came back from a round the world trip, got into it, started selling holidays. Technology obviously completely has impacted retail. You know, we went from a time as little as 15, 20 years ago with queues at every store, wanting to come and book holidays no matter how complex they were, to individuals on their phones saying, oh, I've got this flight here, I can book it for this price, having a conversation live with a travel expert in the store. So to combat that and to evolve with it, retail has had to change, and I think probably most dramatically in the last 5 years, that actually you're really focusing on, okay, we're fortunate to be in a retail business that is selling an experience that is incredible. Travel is a great trip, especially if you're traveling to selling to a younger market, first-time travelers. So it's enlightening. So you have to start that experience of what the holiday is at that point of sale and in retail. And I think that's where we've been and had to change, go from a commodity to a real experience.
What about, obviously, Thomas Cook, we've heard about today. Is that, I'm not talking about Thomas Cook in its own right of whether it deserved to go or not, but is it still symptomatic of the industry that the number of shops is going to keep declining?
I think it will over probably 5 to 10 years. I think it will also throw up experiences and a retail distribution that we can't actually imagine yet if you're talking that far. I think I was certainly not alone when the Thomas Cook collapse was there, that we were hugely concerned about the consumer response and consumer confidence in retail. What I think actually happened was the reverse, and that might be short-term only, but I think the impact that the consumer had on Thomas Cook brand, so many people taking it to heart that this high street brand was no longer there, the role that Hays then played in that actually has seen a transform. And our retail stores from September, and bearing in mind we're not competing with Thomas Cook customers, has bounced back.
Interesting.
So I think there's a real place still in the UK travel industry for a travel expert and an agent, as long as they're offering a really good service and an experience to that customer.
I think the repatriation of however many clients, 150,000 was it?
Yeah.
Was done so well as well that the public did realise you can book through a travel agent and have that confidence you are going to be looked after.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely raised the profile of lots of different things, the security, etc. that you get from working with an agent as well.
Okay. So a bit like record shops, bookshops, things don't go away entirely. There may be a diminished number of travel agencies around, but the people who are good do a fantastic job and service for the industry.
And as you say, thank God for Atoll.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Alistair, you've seen a few changes in your life.
Yes, a few, yeah. When I started in travel, it was in local radio, and it was all very straightforward. There were the gatekeepers, in effect, the news distribution networks, either print or radio or television, sorry, or TV or radio or television, or yes, you know what I mean. And yes, for me, I saw the changes coming. I saw as you say, I'm quite technologically minded, so I remember writing a paper for the grown-ups at the GWR network about digital radio and what opportunities it would provide for us. And this was back in 2003, thereabouts. 1993. I could see it coming, but I didn't see the segmentation happening so quickly. So in that time, I was working, as you've already said, I was working for Classic FM. Mine was one of the few programs that was not classical music. It was what we call general service radio. And we had a book program. We nicked the gardening team from the BBC. And mine was the last to go because it made lots of money and it was really aspirational for our listeners. But they all went because we started getting into the segmentation. If you're listening to pre-1940s jazz.com or FM, you expect to hear pre-1940s jazz. And if you're listening to classic FM, you don't expect to hear Valerie Singleton halfway up Mount Sinai. And that's where it changed. And I didn't see that coming. But as you say, I moved straight online and started producing audio for the internet.
As far as I'm aware, there are no radio programs on travel now, but it's been supplanted by podcasts,
yeah.
which are on the rise.
Yes, very much on the rise, and it's a very exciting time for, as Chloe will no doubt agree. I mean, it's a very exciting time now for audio producers and for good podcasters. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Chloe, on that point.
Yeah.
So you were born into digital, effectively.
Yeah.
In the post-radio career.
Yeah.
Podcasts, video, you're involved with as well as blogging.
Yeah.
Is radio up there for you as well?
Well, it's where I began, but I can't say it's part of what I'm doing currently, but it is a little bit on the agenda now, seeing, you know, the market has changed, podcasts are really booming, and I think listening to someone describe an experience in travel is a wonderful way to kind of fully immerse yourself in it. So it might be something I dabble in soon enough, because, yeah, I've got the skills from my old job, and it would be nice to be using them with this one, but video and blogging is more where I position myself at the moment.
Podcasts, I'd love to get into podcasting, but everybody says it does take a lot of time to put this together.
Yeah, and it's very hard to turn it into a kind of commercial business as well. I think it's a great passion project, but I think if you think you're going to make your money out of it, I think you probably need to do it more as a side project to start with and see how it goes.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Now, Peter, talking about the demise of radio there, you were in the golden days of travel on the television. Tell me a bit about that period, but also can you see, as I talked about radio not having travel anymore, can you see mainstream television having travel programs in the future?
No, I can't. The market has changed too much. The business model of Wish You Were Here and the BBC, although they were less honest about it than we were, was that we were paid for essentially by the travel industry, be it the big tour operators, airlines, and tourist boards. And that just doesn't exist in the same way. And when you think we started in 1973, we shot the first series in 1973. In those days, it was made for ITV, and the unions were very strong in ITV. And the unions had an agreement that anything over 3 hours flying or 1,000 miles, they were entitled to first-class travel. Business class didn't exist then, but they had first-class travel, and they're stuck to it. And we, through strange quirks, which are not really relevant to this, but we occasionally were taking a film crew. We would have about 7 people. Chloe, I imagine you don't take quite as many.
Just on my own. I wouldn't mind business class flights though.
So they couldn't change, you know, it just wouldn't happen like that now. I mean, the travel now is very much to do with personal experience and celebrities doing this and so on. And the Wish You Were Here's and holiday programs. And the other thing that has really changed is, of course, the audience. When we started, I'd done a motoring program before that. We actually had a debate before we did something in France as to whether we should explain to people that you drove on the other side of the road. And we decided that probably you should. Yeah. So the audience was very inexperienced, and they looked to the television for reassurance and ideas and confidence, and that's what we provided them with, and that's why both series were very, BBC and ITV, were very successful.
Because 73 wasn't long after, was it the Labour government had scrapped the £50 cap on how much money you're allowed to take abroad?
Yeah, about 5 years. I think it was about 68 or something that happened.
Extraordinary times.
Yeah.
But Wish You Were Here, I think at its peak was getting 18 million viewers.
We got our biggest audience, for reasons that, however much one looked at and tried to analyze it, had no idea why, was 18.6 million.
Wow.
And of course there are only 3 channels then.
Yeah.
Channel 4 hadn't started, so and there was no competition.
And of the I mean, every celebrity under the sun is now traveling around some country in the world for some spurious reason. Is there somebody you actually respect on those myriad of TV programs?
Yeah, the person I really respect is Simon Reeve, who I think does really interesting programs. But they're not holiday programs. They may go to places where people go on holiday, but they'll give you an insight into that. I mean, I saw he did one in Alaska, which was fascinating. But they're not exactly holiday programs.
No, but he is a reporter. He's not the story, is he? He's portraying it.
No, but he'll find something original and interesting in all those places, and he's not in the pocket of anybody who.
No, he seems quite abrasive.
Doesn't know what to say.
He's great. Now, I have got a slide that I'd like to put up, if we may, on the screen. And this, I just pulled this together for my own entertainment. 40 years of world travel marketing, if you get it. Good. And the events in that time. Clearly, there are an awful lot of other events in there, but these, to me, are quite salient points. Now, I'd just like to run through the panel and ask what they think, if any of these, is the most relevant events in the last 40 years, and if not, to suggest their own. And I'd also like you lot to use Slido to, either choose something from there with any story you have to tell or comment, or suggest something else as well. So, Tim, please, from the list or not, your own suggestion.
Well, I think I touched on it, and I think it's a combination of, from internet launching and Expedia and OTAs becoming a significant player in the industry to then social media. I think as a business that has been, heavily involved with youth travel, we speak to the most digitally savvy customers, yet we are a retail-based business. So the whole play of whether that's Facebook or Instagram now has been crucially important to us, not only from a sort of an opportunity and a distribution perspective, but clearly from an inspiration perspective. And you have, kids coming in to book a trip now that know far more than they've ever known. That they know exactly where they want to go because they've seen it here in peer-to-peer or, bloggers or celebrity endorsement, etc., through a variety of channels. You talk about TV, now the role of YouTube in that space as well. So they know where they want to go because of that information that they now have accessible to them on their phone while they're sat, on the train.
Because one of the previous sessions, I saw Emma Mead from Visit Britain saying, still, I think it must be true, you still go to family and friends for that point of reference, and certainly on anything important or a big holiday. But you're saying you are getting the kids, millennials coming through, I've seen this, I want to go there, tell me more about it.
Some of that is still family and friends, some of that is still peer-to-peer, sort of communication through social, it's just opened people's eyes from that perspective. I think word of mouth and traditional word of mouth, whether that's through a family member or a more traditional ambassador of a product or a destination, still carries a lot of weight.
Well, taking that point on, Chloe, what would you say, or would you like to back up to what Tim was saying?
Similar, but I'd probably go for, I guess, iPhones, smartphones, because, for me, just as a traveller, not as a blogger, I just think as soon as you get to the destination now, you have everything at your fingertips. You can be planning where you're going for lunch that day by finding the best restaurant in the area. You can be booking your tour for the next day. You can be planning your next flight and booking it. You can just be doing everything. Whereas I think before, I used to spend months planning trips because it took that much planning that I needed to, write down places I wanted to stay or visit. And even just in my generation, I've seen that transform to, I could book my flight now to go somewhere tomorrow, and that wasn't a thing I would have been able to do before. So I think having that accessibility both before you go and also on the ground as soon as you get there, it's made a huge difference.
It makes it easier, ultimately.
It does.
I think that's a sort of common misconception, I think, about this technology and what's it removed, and people, it's taken some of the joy out of that travel experience. Actually, it's allowed people to go to far more places. It's opened up far more opportunities.
Yeah.
One sort of technological sort of anecdote is, you know, the paper tickets. You know, people used to walk out with a paper ticket not too long ago, and actually on a big trip in South America, they might need to travel hundreds of miles to make a change of that ticket. Now it's a phone call or an app, and they make that change, and it means that they can do and spend the time traveling doing what they're there to do.
Yeah.
And I think increasingly, as you say before, and during the trip, but people being able to talk to you while you're in destination as well. The potential for that really hasn't taken off yet, but it's still that piece you can't do without it now, can you?
No, definitely not.
Alistair, what would you say on the list?
Well, I noticed you've put a plant in there for me, 2 of them. Tim Berners-Lee setting up the World Wide Web, and then Classic FM launching, but I'm going to go for neither. I'm going to go for a more precise moment. I think in 2009, it was here at World Travel Market, in those days back in Earl's Court, so there's a memory for everybody. Who here remembers Olympia, by the way? Yeah. And I remember an odd Spanish couple trawling around all the bloggers who gathered in a bar after the end of the day, and were basically just introducing themselves and taking cards and everything else. And out of that came that first trip to Valencia, which the Spanish were really good at leading the way on new technology, new ways of thinking about travel, and thinking about the effect of content creators and influencers. So they gathered together, they literally hot-housed all of those sort of key people that we know now, the Cashes and the Melvins and the Adventure Girl, 1.2 million Twitter followers at that point, the Jessica Berlin, who was doing Cirque du Soleil's social media, Gary Arndt, all of those sort of key people. That's the first time they really kind of got together. So I think you came the second year. I think that was the moment when, in Europe, blogging and content creation took off, and it was about a year later, 2010, Travel Bloggers Unite in Manchester, when the first discussion happened about how all this got paid for and how bloggers could make a living out of it. And I remember Keith Jenkins talking about how he needed to make money in order to run the site and everything else, and so in effect he needed to be paid while he was out there on a trip. And literally 6 months later, there were a bunch of bloggers out running on a stipend of about 200 quid a day on a press trip. And when I told the British Guild of Travel Writers there were bloggers out there being paid to go on a press trip, jaws hit the floor. And I think that was a moment when things began to really change. And it's been breathtakingly exciting ever since, because every year something new happens, some new approach, some new way of working, and so that for me is definitively the moment.
Okay, that's understandable given what you're involved with now, you three, the digital, the explosion of it and the harnessing of it and making better use of it is clearly become the most dominant change in any industry in the last 10-15 years. Peter, what's your take?
I'm tempted to say the wheeled suitcase, which was one of the great inventions. I think, without doubt, the coming of what we used to call new technology, which isn't now, but that has changed everything, as we've heard. I would just say that before that, I think the biggest change that happened in my travel professional life was the coming of the jet engine and the jet aircraft, and that actually was the driver for mass travel. And if you think that people were using old wartime turboprops, or later than wartime, but the turboprop Britannias, and then suddenly the 737 came along, and you could do 3 round trips to the Mediterranean in a day, and you saved about 550 quid on your fuel bill flying to Palma. So that was very significant, and that really started the expansion of the 1970s.
And now you can fly non-stop from London to Sydney.
Yes.
That's quite terrifying.
Exactly,
Sorry, I'll come out. Taking that point on, for me, it's the low-cost airlines because of exactly that reason. It changed everything. And then 9/11 came along. And before Ryanair and EasyJet came along, it cost 360 quid to fly to Nice return, no matter which airline, Air France or British Airways, as was. It became a penny after 2011 and with the low-cost airlines. Commoditizing of travel, stripping away that glamour and just treating it as a product, meant the destination became the thing rather than the form of travel. Alistair, you wanted to say something?
Only that it was interesting when you were talking just now about having to hire a whole aeroplane to transport your kit. I do remember going to a Richard Branson launch of a new airline which was flying Dakotas from Orlando, and it was down to the Key West. And again, the television crews had to have a whole separate airplane to carry all that stuff, and I was so grateful I had a microphone. But the reason I raise it is because I want to raise the Richard Branson. Who I think is an extraordinary man, and the subject of our talk is 40 years past. 40 years ahead, we're talking about 2060.
Space, yeah.
And he's been, I think, the dominance. I don't want to lead you into the future too early, but actually that's the really interesting stuff, where the history is history.
Yeah.
And I think, sorry, I'm just taking over your schedule, but I think one of the things that's definitely going to dominate the next 40 years, and it's a long period ahead, is climate change. It will be, areas that are being drowned and all that kind of stuff, and this is something that's going to be hovering over us in one form or another all the time. Now, the two things technologies that he has and ran with were Virgin Galactica and the what's it called, the tunnel, tunnel, sucky through tunnel. Somebody help me out.
Virgin,
Hyperloop, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hyperloop, I think, will be very important because it is a land-based, high-speed transport system that will be environmentally friendly. I'm not sure about the space thing, but the reason I raised the space things is because I had an epiphany in 2006. I suddenly thought to myself, wait a minute, if he goes up, because until then it was just a space ride, space tourist we used to talk about, but if you go up from Arizona, there's no reason you have to come down to Arizona. You could come down in Scotland, in Lossiemouth or somewhere. So I see Branson with Virgin Galactic actually running an airline system or a space airline system that is environmentally friendly, other than the bit getting up there, but otherwise it's just floating through, and then it comes back down again. So I see two technologies looking ahead, thanks to Mr. Branson, that...
well, you just looked ahead to about 10 to 5 when we're wrapping up the programme, so we'll come back to that later.
Okay.
A couple of questions from the audience. Chloe, 40 years ago, no one even dreamt about being a digital influencer. Well, that's true, because there was no digital. Are you not worried to build your career in an industry that is so highly uncertain?
Well, no, because even 5 years ago when I started, it was a very different industry to what it is now, and I think it's just a case of constantly adapting, changing, adding new skills. I didn't know how to make a video 5 years ago. I do now. I think in 40 years, who knows what I might be on a rocket going to space, doing a live broadcast or something. Who knows?
Lossiemouth,
yeah, exactly.
That was from an anonymous mouse. Few pieces from Steve Biggs. One TV programme that does resonate with him is Travel Man with Richard Ayoade. Is that pronounced correct?
Yeah.
Ayoade. Are comedy-driven documentaries the saviour for travel on the telly?
I have to say that I haven't watched a lot of that, but they're very well made. They're very good programs.
Yeah. Do you know him, Chloe?
Yeah, I find it quite interesting because I think if you want to watch travel shows on TV at the moment, you've either got Jack Whitehall with his dad going around Bangkok, getting himself into all sorts of mischief. Yeah. You've got Richard Ayoade doing that kind of comedian goes with another comedian and does something funny somewhere. And then you've got David Attenborough and Simon Reeve doing the hard-hitting stuff. And there's nothing in the kind of Joe Public, let's go on a nice holiday and showcase, the Wish You Were Here holiday style. And
would you like to see one like that?
I miss that personally because I think there is room for that inspiration still. And I don't think everyone goes to YouTube for it or Instagram. I still think there's a prime time slot for it somewhere, but finding the right host maybe.
Like what you were saying earlier, there was an educational element to it as well when you started about should you drive on the left or... There's a scope for that, surely.
Funnily enough, I think one of the programs which is quite close to the old travel programs is I forget what it's actually called, but it's made by Monica Galetti and Giles Corran about fancy hotels.
Yeah.
If I was at the end of my career in ITV, I felt that the program should become much more specific. We did very broad destination pieces, which were right for the time. People needed to know that. But now people want to know specific hotels that have changed perhaps their offer in the last 12 months. And I think that is actually quite an interesting program because it's looking very much at detail, and that's really one of the things that has changed.
Well, Tim, coming to you, we talked about retail earlier, and people coming and saying, I want information on this. Are the tour operators adapting quickly enough to what the consumer wants to be given, i.e. the detail, the specifics of what they want to have on holiday?
I think, Alistair touched on the segmentation of it and the fact that, everybody's customer request is niche and, independent and suited for them. And I think that's how they eat the sort of content as well. And I think there's a lot of really great travel content out there. I think you've got to look at, whatever streamed through Netflix and Prime and all of those things which are in every household now. But it's more niche than that. It is like the food travel. Is huge, and it's always been a part of it clearly. But it's huge. It's a dominant sort of industry in itself, and then comedy comes into that piece as well. So I think what it is that there's a much wider breadth of it rather than a sort of more traditional sort of holiday inspirational program. And just on the YouTube element, that I know that our customer base, and you're looking at, Gen Z now, 16-year-olds,
Gen Alpha
17,
coming up.
Absolutely. My kids are 10 years old, and they only watch YouTube. That's all they watch.
And they're consuming pieces, that short. That's the point. And literally they're getting shorter. Peter said just now that the programs they were making then they were right for the time, and they suited the audience of the time. But we now have to think about Gen A and Gen Z and the kind of material that they're consuming on multiple platforms throughout the day. It's a continuous process, and they'll be watching a 4-minute piece on going to Malaysia and a specific food in Malaysia, and they'll watch it for all of 30 seconds.
Well, that palette of...
It's not invalid, but
No, it is. I agree entirely. YouTube is a phenomenon, and people are plugging into that, finding inspiration. They're also telling their parents what they want to do on holiday, which might not necessarily involve a flight anymore. So it comes back to a point you were making earlier. The environment is... I was at a Dorset Tourism Conference recently, and an old boy who ran a holiday park with caravans on the cliffs was saying, the thing about this, lads, is this environmental thing is not going to go away very quickly. And I said, well, yeah, that's the point. It's not... seems to be serious now. It's here to stay.
No,
so this is going to impact travel massively. Tim, kick off on this subject.
I think we're at a tipping point now, but with a generational change in that space. But people still want to travel, and the world is a big place. So it's the consideration of travel, and I think it's been a theme throughout every talk that I've heard at WTM today. That actually everyone involved in travel plays a conscious part in that, and lots of people have been for not just the recent period, but for the last 20 years. But it's more importantly, from our perspective of selling holidays, it's the customer's conscious choice of, okay, if we are traveling, what do I want to get out of it? What do I want to give back in those things? We ran a survey of our market, so sort of under 25-year-olds, 90% said they would look to volunteer, if on their holidays. However, currently, about 20% of our customer base are choosing to volunteer. So absolutely, it's a tipping point of that, and I think more and more people it will change, and people will go into that and more things. But so it's about travel with a purpose, really. People will still travel. They might say, okay, I'm not going to travel as much or as frequently. I think the pressure from a travel point is more on the corporate travel. That because as a business, you have to also be supporting the environmental impact, and you can't be seen to be travelling for 2 days here and 2 days there. But from a leisure perspective, as long as the reward is there and what you're leaving behind is prevalent, then I think it will still be a key part and something that people want to do.
Peter, take on. I think you made the point, and I'd like to hear this again, that you see cyclical change in the industry anyway in the last 40 years, but you think this is important?
I think this is very important, and I think the big change is that the environmental pressures that have come and the impact of tourism has been basically in the destinations, and it's concerned landscape and culture. And the very first thing which I was aware of was first complaints were about aircraft noise, and that was one of the very first environmental complaints. What's changed now? Those things could all be addressed and changed and modified by the travel industry, and very largely have been. And you could point to all sorts of wonderful schemes, particularly in the Antarctic, very vulnerable part of the world, very well managed by Antarctic tour operators. What's changing now is that it's being taken out of the hands of the travel industry.
Right.
And I think there are going to be quite significant changes over time. The problem that a government has is that, as we know, we don't pay VAT on aircraft fuel. But what government is going to do that independently, unilaterally? You just wipe off, So it's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
But there is no question that public attitudes are changing, and I think it will be driven by public attitudes. Don't get me on to Extinction Rebellion, which I think is...
Okay, I won't get you onto that.
No. But at the same time, I think, in the same way as people now are choosing their cars, and they'll choose hybrids or electric, they'll choose their fridges and white goods, and they will also choose their travel. And that is beginning to happen.
Yeah, we can clearly mitigate in travel still. You can make quieter planes, more efficient fuel use and so on. But it's still, as we know, cruise ships and aeroplanes pollute. Chloe, you're finding more reaction or thinking about this?
I'm definitely conscious that I guess people like bloggers, Instagrammers and influencers have this responsibility now to, show people that share the issues, but also show that there are things we can do to improve the situation.
What could you do?
Well, personally, I'm traveling in the UK more, which I love, and it's something I'm very passionate about anyway, but I'm excited to share that with my audience, who is mainly based within the UK. A few of us a couple of years ago set up what we call Blogger Grove, which is a little grove of trees in Scotland in the Scottish Highlands, which we donate to each year, and we offset some of our carbon emissions by donating, basically, and they plant this little row of trees for us, which we want to go and visit at some point.
Is that a conscious salving there, or is it a genuine?
It's genuine. And it's something that I know there's this very big initiative at the moment. It's just started in the last couple of weeks with a load of the top YouTubers who've set up another donation fundraiser called Team Trees. They're trying to get 20 million trees planted before 2020. Right. And there's a lot of people who are trying to. Part of it is about education as well, about showing people that you can do things like this and that it can make a bit of a difference.
It was my 10-year-old that told me about that.
Really?
That's
there you go.
We're going through.
Well, and I've heard this as well, that within the industry, people thinking the kids could actually lead this by telling their parents, I'm not getting on a plane, or we want to go, and that really could be a game changer, you say, on top of what's already happening out there. Alice, did you ever take?
Yes, I totally agree with Chloe. What's interesting, you asked the question, were you salving your consciousness? But actually, this is an audience-driven thing. And what's really encouraging is that the blogger and creative content community are actively talking about this at events we've all been at recently, and ways in which we might be able to ameliorate what it is that we do. If you ask the question, what is it all going to look like in 2060, I can tell you it's going to look like the forest moon of Endor.
Yeah.
The whole planet's going to be covered with trees because we're all going to be having to offset for our travel.
Right, we'll pack up now. Couple of questions from the audience, and again, I'd like to take from all of you on this. Richard's asking, do you feel there is a role in future for national tourist boards? And Alex is saying, how is managing tourism boards going to change in the next 20 years? In this context of environmental concerns, is it the country itself and the destination most liable, in this case Brazil possibly, or ones that are seen to be damaging the environment most, going to suffer the most? Can they change consumer reaction to where these places where they are visiting? Peter?
I think the answer is that there will still be a case for national tourist boards, but their role will change as the pressures on their countries change. And I can think of two examples. One is Cambodia is desperately trying to increase its tourism, and undoubtedly the country can take it, and it would do great benefit to Cambodia. On the other hand, I believe that the Netherlands are now seeing their role much more as managing the tourism that is already coming in, rather than promoting the destination to get even more.
Yeah.
So I think it'll change.
Totally true of Amsterdam.
The case of spreading tourism out as well, we've actually noticed just from having meetings here and over the last few weeks that tourist boards are actively saying, don't come here, go here. And that's like a job that, like an initiative that they've got now, is to try and combat over-tourism in some of their destinations and try and showcase, the second cities or the third cities.
Well, that is, it's a separate subject, over-tourism, to the environmental concerns, but it's clearly all sorted, is linked in, managing your tourism better, rather than just saying, come to Greece or come to Spain. Tim, will you see this change?
We work closely with lots of tourist boards, promoting ultimately destinations. I think the most successful are where the tourist boards are more aligned with whatever the government policies are. So, the example of Brazil is a difficult sell for a tourist board when you've got a country doing that, where they're aligned and working really well. So we've worked closely with the Philippines here over the last few years, and we've seen huge growth and great dispersal to tons of islands, and worked with projects and things in those spaces and profiled the right type of product and the right type of destinations that are going to make the area better as well. So a big role, and certainly working with agents, bloggers, whoever else, to really give exposure to those destinations.
I think, Alistair, would you agree with this, that the focus on a country is going to be better spotlighted, and they're going to have to respond to?
I'm sure of it. I'm a fan of tourist offices. I'm not sure they always get the credit they deserve, and certainly the ones who move quickly are very interesting. A lot of them have already gone through extraordinary change in the last decade, where they've moved from these kind of monolithic organisations with visitors booths, information booths and things and all that kind of stuff, into organisations that are much more nimble. One of the first things they did in the big, what we call the ripple, was that they started dropping their siloed budgets, and they started integrating marketing with PR and working on sort of coordinated campaigns. And the really advanced ones then moved on to becoming, in effect, digital agencies, and that's the way they describe themselves now. So I think tourist boards are very good at adapting to this kind of stuff, and I'm absolutely confident they will play a key role in cementing the future.
On Wednesday we have a session called Best of Social Media, which is the projects that tourist boards primarily have instigated over the last 12 months. And the Faroe Islands did one this year. I don't know if you probably all heard about it. Faroe Islands closed for business in April, just over a weekend. They said, well, you can't come to the Faroe Islands because we're closed. There's a marketing campaign because they did shut down all the guest houses and everything else, but the idea was they redid the footpaths, they redid planting of fences and cleaned the whole thing up, and invited volunteers to come to the Faroe Islands and help them do what was necessary. And I think it was 50 or 150 volunteers went there. They had to pay their own airfare, they got free accommodation. But the marketing was brilliant, because the Faroe Islands is a bunch of wet rocks in the North Atlantic, as you know. I've been there, it's fantastic. But they have to be creative, and they have to be seen to be ticking it all the time, because they can't afford to be seen to be detrimental to their environment in any way whatsoever. So if you've got a pristine one, you have to preserve it. You're seen to be doing that, then there's a massive tick.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're getting a number of tourists completely disproportionate to the size of the country. This has got to be good examples to follow in the future.
I think the one thing that we haven't really touched on is the growth of tourism. I mean, tourism, actually, if you look at it, is a very small thing. It's huge in terms of numbers and money, and you know, it represents a massive part of the global GDP. But actually, even now, there are only 18% of the world's population who are tourists. So, and if you think that China, who are now beginning to travel in quite large numbers, the Chinese, and that by 2030, I think it is, it's reckoned that very nearly a quarter of all international tourists will be Chinese.
It's terrifying.
And I think one of the things that will happen, I think the Faroe Islands is a partial example of that, is that we shall start to think of destinations in the same way as we think of cinemas. And they have a capacity, and when the thing is, they'll sell tickets, and when it's full, then you won't get in.
Yeah.
And so I think there's got to be some quite radical thinking. Also, dispersal, and that coming back to the tourist boards. One of the things I'd ban is the bucket list, because everybody wants to go to the same place, and you've got to try and dissuade people and take them elsewhere and tell them there are other things to see and do.
Well, this goes back to overcrowding, and it's just, I saw the Euromonitor report in the last session, and all the graphs are just doing this for volumes of people, particularly China and India outbound markets, but also other parts of the world. Tim, what's your 20-year plan at STA Travel to handle this?
Wow. I'd like to tell you the next sort of picture of the next 5 years or 10 years and 20 years, but that I think, as I said, you know, like a retail business that is talking to people that are first-time travellers. I think there will always be a space for the advice of travel experts in that space, whether that's face-to-face, whether that's at the end of a chat online, whether that's via Skype, however that choice of communication is. I mean, this year, 2019, it's chat, real life chat, we're not talking robots, has been phenomenal. You know, I think probably we've seen the phones, traditional phones really decline. People are still coming into stores, but chat has beginning to replace people calling up and having a conversation with people. And that's just in the last 18 months, 2 years. So what happens in the next 5 years? I said, like an AI, that's a massive topic. And we've played around with various AI content over the last few years, and that's developed so fast. I mean, only 5 years ago, you couldn't buy content off the shelf. You had to go and create it. So actually, when does, a travel agent become virtual? Because that's what it is. People want it to be easy, hey? They want you to go to them or virtually to get to that point. But I do believe still fundamentally in that connection of people to people. And I think that's the value that will continue to be had from when you're talking selling holidays. It just depends on that medium, I think.
Okay. Peter, Alistair.
No, I totally agree. And we haven't even talked about 5G and then what comes after 5G, which is going to accelerate that whole process. I think we're going to see the splitting of those sort of centralized points. I'm sorry, you guys, but you're going to be able to buy travel components everywhere. You're going to be able to buy them off Chloe. You're going to be able to buy them off, locally. As you go past places, your near-field technology will trigger your phone and tell you that there's a tour just leaving for the islands or whatever. You are going to be able to buy travel all over the place, and I think that's going to accelerate, and it's going to be absolutely fascinating.
I totally agree with that. And it just reminded me of, I think it's Cambridge Tourist Office have bought the local walking tour company, so they can manage better the crowds within. Not everybody's going to be in the same King's College at the same time, but they can push tours around.
Yeah.
So that goes back to the tourist board taking responsibility for managing people, making sure that the residents aren't upset and causing friction with the visitors as well. Chloe, again, this is stuff I think is going to, and the live movement and the live chat, don't go there because this is happening. You can see all this happening as well.
Yeah. And I can also see, I think, the number of people who now have, I don't know, Google Homes and Alexas and those kind of things in their homes now, they're saying that that is going to be, could well be part of the user journey with travel bookings. So you could be, you know, Alexa, book my flights to blah, and then this tour, and suddenly you're not really doing anything through your phone or through your laptop, and it's all just done and you turn up. I mean, I don't know if that's where it will go.
I think the downside there is choice, because we recognise right from the word go that unlike if you make a search online through Google, obviously, what you get is the first 10 results on your SERPs page, and then if you go to page 2, another 10. But with voice, and you
Get
say,
one.
you know, yeah, exactly. I'm thinking about going to Buenos Aires, and you're given one choice, and so it's going to be magic for the person, the airline who's selling that ticket. But nobody's going to start looking through a list. And I think there are still, although it's getting cleverer, I think there are still problems with voice. And I can give you a concrete example. This morning, I phoned Marianne, my girlfriend. Only when I said to Google, "Okay, Google, phone Marianne,"
Marianne was delighted.
It phoned somebody called Marion, who may be here in the audience. I've no idea who she was. She was obviously on my contact thing. I should have said phone my girlfriend because it understands that. But anyway, but it's not there yet, and I think we're we're kind of deluding ourselves if we think. But maybe by the end of the period that we're talking about, come 2059, then we're going to be able to have fluent conversations, Turing style, with an intelligent bot. But I don't think it's there just yet.
No.
Okay. Please.
I just take tiny issue with my esteemed colleague. is that everything that we're talking about is based on the continued, uninterrupted, exponential growth of tourism. My point is that I don't think it can, because I don't think not without some very all the sort of mechanisms you're talking about to sell and promote and make travel easier have also got to work to make travel more manageable and to control it, because we ain't seen nothing yet.
No, totally take that on board, yeah.
And I noticed one conversation involving the head of Leeds University, head of environmental studies. His taken is, you fly once a year, that's your lot. If you want to fly again, £10,000 surcharge or £1,000 surcharge. Something that is such a deal breaker. You've got to break the logjam of that and flights and 100. Was it Royal Caribbean saying they've got 100 ships on order in the next 7 years? Good Lord, this is frightening stuff. So you're right, Peter. It's got to be something that kicks in to say stop. So, moving away from
I was going to say,
Extinction
will we
Rebellion.
all meet here again in this this time in 20 years?
A quick one. SS says videos had a great impact on the travel industry. Isn't the proliferation of video today making the content become quite monotonous? That's a bit unfair, wouldn't you say, Chloe?
Very unfair. I think there's some incredible videos out there, and there's a lot that are still unique and showing a different angle to a destination, or showing, a real local side that most people wouldn't have access to. I don't think I think there's space for all of it, but there are some excellent ones.
Do you create your own videos at STA?
We work with people that create those videos. I think what's interesting there is, and it links back to tourist boards as well, we've had plenty of conversations with tourist boards country level, and ultimately, if they're not really wanting to shout about what is niche and what is amazing about that, which is ultimately feeds the content, and only want to be seen as the gateway to a country or destination, that's when there's direct competition and it becomes a bit bland. When you're just talking about as a commodity. But what this content is allowed to do is actually say this is what's available, and as long as whoever it is creating the content, whether it's an individual, a company, or a tourist board, is really shouting about something that is unique to that destination, that's inspirational.
And that goes back to storytelling, which
And answer real
changed in
questions.
40
Yes.
years.
Still at the heart of it. Yeah.
But Peter mentioned it earlier. It's that thing of actually touching the anxieties of travellers. You know, we all seen this thing where we, you know, everybody writes about when you get off the aeroplane at Tegel in Berlin, you can get an X9 bus into the centre of town. They tell you where it goes from and all the rest of it. They tell you how much it costs, but they don't tell you what the ticket looks like and what you do with it. Do you give it to the driver? Do you know? And I think that's what we've got to always have at the back of our minds, and we need to be telling people what it is they actually are anxious about.
Okay.
What might I make a fool of myself doing?
Excellent.
I can speak to that.
We're five minutes away from the end, or from 5 o'clock. Great input, broad, wide-ranging stuff. As there's bound to be past change and where we are and crystal balling for the future. So I'd leave it with Andre to ask the ultimate question. What, in your opinion, is the next big game changer in the travel industry? From all we've discussed today, Peter, what's your game changer, the next big one?
Oh, well, I think probably I've touched on it, because I think it's going to be the external influences on travel, the fact that the industry that, as we have known it, is no longer going to have quite such control over its own destiny that it has done. And they're going to have to be great changes in attitudes. One of the things I think that is going to happen, I think that there will be an increase in train travel, which will be a byproduct of the resistance to flying. And I think that the journey is going to become much more important than it is now. Yeah. Everything is directed on getting people straight into the destination and then what you do in the destination. I think actually the journey is going to become quite an important element, and it's one of the ways that you justify train travel. I have to just tell you that in the very early days of package tours, people chartered trains. I'm not talking about Thomas Cook, the 1840s, but I'm talking in the sort of the 1960s, and to Spain and south of France, and they chartered trains, and they thought that they could sell up to 24 hours in a train. After that, they felt that it would be unmarketable.
Well, and also, I don't know why it disappeared, monorail, where you put your, you caught the ferry over and you put your car on the train in Le Havre or wherever, and you picked it up in Monaco.
It disappeared though because of the price. Because you can fly to wherever, and then you can rent a car for wherever. You know, it's cheap as chips, and that's what's changed. So if there's going to be a competitor, there either has to be a conscious decision of the customer that's buying it that is willing to pay the extra to not have that environment.
Maybe if the parents are telling the kids are telling the parents, so this is what we want. The kids would actually love the idea of sleeping on a train all night if the parents can afford it, and a lot of them can. Maybe you need to make that journey again more attractive, make airports more attractive rather than a selling point all the time.
Well, suddenly Dan Elkin's Snow Carbon, Dan's been for many years a strong advocate for taking the train up to the Alps. Suddenly it's sort of back in favour again, and very welcome too. So
and I guess somebody said in the session yesterday how Sue last night, Sue Ockel, the travel PR, saying how she used to offset by giving money to, when it was fashionable 5 years ago, it fell out of fashion, offsetting your flights. Daniel at Snow Carbon has been doing that, and so these things are back, and I won't bang on about it. Chloe, what's your game changer for the next?
I'm interested I've been reading up a bit on electric flights and reading where things are going with that, and I saw a stat yesterday. It said that EasyJet will be integrating electric planes by 2027. So I'm interested to kind of follow that. They're saying that long haul is pretty much impossible with what they've got at the moment, but short haul will be. So in terms of the environmental impact,
that'd be huge.
Will that make a big difference to the people who are currently feeling very eco-conscious and unable to go anywhere?
Well, effectively, you could then wipe out domestic travel at least.
Exactly.
Sorting that out.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Tim, sorry.
Jump around. I think short term, we've seen some pretty major things that have happened just now as well, which will have an impact. The Thomas Cook thing that we've talked about, and Atoll, that actually that will now change. I think we'll begin to see a shift in that. I think our biggest competitor recently has been the segmentation of products.
So you mean more protection?
Correct, yeah, because people have been purchasing from various different places. So what does that look like now? What will even be in place to protect the consumer? But it will change. It will change, and that will impact people's buying habits. I think the single biggest factor, and it's a bit vague, but is ultimately that new generation, that their expectations will be very, very different to the people buying holidays now. And that could be that they don't wish to travel. So I don't believe it. I think that there will still be a place, not just because of where I'm sat from being at STHL, but because of, a simple fact is something like Gen Z. A big issue was made about saying 50% of these guys haven't had a drink in the last week. Yeah, they're generation sensible. 50% of them have still had a drink and still like to go out and have a good time and stuff. So travel still will be there for a big majority of these people. But how that looks and how they book it will change. It will have to change.
Massively. Alistair, final word.
Okay, well, I was just on the tech thing. Very interesting. I think there's been extraordinary changes literally in the last 12 months on battery technology. We're suddenly going to see a new generation of batteries and hydrogen fuel cells as well, which will enable a lot of the kind of tech we're talking about, both marine and road and rail and so on. But my final word, you kind of nicked it from me, because I think the big game changer is your 10-year-old and my 22-year-old, almost to be 23. He's, my case, Gen Z, yours, Gen A. They're going to be the ones, because we're talking about this period in 2059. So the baby boomers, we're not going to be here. And it's going to be driven by those guys and what they want.
And I think they'll have a quite different outlook.
I think they will.
We've got away with in the past.
It's going to be brilliant.
You'd like to say anything else?
Only that predicting the future is a mug's game.
So we'll see you all next year.
Events, dear boy. Events.
Two very quick examples. First of all, when Wish We Here started in the 70s, we were going through the oil crisis. I remember reading a book predicting what was going to happen in the 70s. The word oil didn't appear once in the index, and that was the big change of shape of the 70s. And the other thing is, the word sustainability, which we all know now, was not in the 1993 Collins Dictionary.
It was all excess.
So these things come out of left field. And,
there we are. There's our crystal ball gazing, a bit of retro, a bit of current, and some fascinating concepts of what's going to happen. It's going to change very rapidly, driven by digital and tech. We know that. However, for now, would you please put your hands together for Tim, Alistair, Chloe, and Peter? And thank you for coming along today. Thank you.